Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, September 22nd, 2022. It's about 11:25 in the morning here on the East Coast of the United States. Lawyers for Virginia, Ginni Thomas, the wife of Justice Clarence Thomas, and lawyers for the House Select Committee on January 6th have jointly announced that Mrs. Thomas has agreed to give an interview to the committee. Now, normally this wouldn't be a big deal, but given to whom she's married, it is a big deal. In fairness and in full disclosure, her husband has been a friend of mine for many years, Justice Clarence Thomas, and I have met Mrs. Thomas socially on a couple of occasions. So I just want you to know about that before I comment on it. The reason this is a big deal is because this issue of January 6th and the prosecution of people for whatever happened on January 6th may reach the Supreme Court of the United States. There is no ethical requirement that a justice of the Supreme Court of the United States recuse himself or herself in the case of a conflict. So Justice Thomas could sit in judgment of the behavior of his own wife. I know that sounds absurd. That is not the case for all the other 1,500 federal jurists in the country. It only applies to the Supreme Court. There is no ethical rule requiring them to recuse themselves from a case. That's the 9 of them. And there's no provision for the other 8 to force the one who has the apparent conflict off. So whatever Mrs. Thomas says to the committee and whatever her involvement has been, if it reaches the Supreme Court, she can certainly count on one vote. That is patently unfair, but that's the law. The law is not always just. The law is not always logic. The law is often just based on history. What are they going to ask her about? Well, apparently they have unearthed emails in which she has encouraged people to participate in schemes to submit phony electors, that is, people who are not truly electors chosen by the public. We know that there was an effort in Arizona, which went for Joe Biden by about 11,000 votes, to send a slate of electors pledged to Donald Trump to the Electoral College. And we know that that scheme was unlawful and probably criminal. We know that there were efforts to do the same thing with respect to Georgia. If Mrs. Thomas were involved in that, depending upon the extent of her involvement, I mean, she may have a First Amendment defense. Yeah, she was cheering them on. She can do that. But if she actively participated in a conspiracy, then the First Amendment defense falls. So I don't know where this is going to go. Judging Freedom is not covered extensively the January 6th hearings. In my opinion, it was an effort to interfere with the orderly changing of power in the government, but only by a few. I think the vast majority of people that were there who got caught up in the violence went there to express political opinions, which were protected by the First Amendment. But the violence was not protected by the First Amendment, and the efforts to interfere, which succeeded for just a few hours, were certainly not protected by the First Amendment. What phases of this, if any, Mrs. Thomas was involved in, time and perhaps her testimony will tell. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.